First of all, can you start just by introducing yourself, please, and telling us, before we delve into it a little bit more deeply, a very brief background of your experience?
Yep, cool. So, I'm Trevor Grant. I'm 62 years old now, and
It's just
that's
a
an age
number.
where it's an age where you start going, "Goodness me, what have I done?" So it's a good question. My experience: I started learning guitar aged 10. My dad was having piano lessons, just informally around. I got into it, so it meant I at least had somebody who understood music around me. Um, I moved when I was 14 to a school that was would nowadays be in special measures. Milestone in Lancing no longer exists. However, it had the most powerful arts department,
Hmm.
what you, Bill, and I would call transformative teachers. So there was a teacher called Alan Strong. Well, to give you the best example, they I'd been there 6 weeks and had a guitar on my back, and the head of music came to me and said, "Oh, can you play?" I said, "Oh, yes." He said, "Oh, well, how do you fancy doing Joseph and the Technicolor Raincoat?" Yeah, absolutely. He said, "Oh, you might need to read some music." Oh, yeah, kind of there. So, full orchestra, all the kids from the
Wow.
school, put on by the music department and the art department. Alan Strong, so that was Aidan Kearney. Their names deserve mentioning because they matter. These were teachers who inflicted art on the greater world. So Aidan Kearney, even up to years ago, the Boundstone Choir would be out everywhere. Um, Alan Strong, there is a foundation from him, some money given to as a scholarship. I think it's only small, but he was the drama teacher, and again one of those empowering teachers that just went, "Yep, you can do stuff." So um, that was my school experience, and I think because they were there saying, "Yeah, you can do this stuff," and the school hall would be, stages would be made. We could play in there. So at age 17, I started with the kind of function bands. Lived in Bognor on the south coast, then was in Worthing. So holiday camps around. So age 17, I was already playing with guys. So old they were. They must have been in their early 20s, which was a thing of fire. I mean, it was, they'd be there using kind of music language now that I'm comfy with. Um, and I'd go, yeah, and then I'd mime. I'd turn the guitar down and mime the songs, and then play a solo. And because I could just get through it, I'd survive. But learnt a lot. 19, I did an audition for Gary Newman's Tube Army. And Gary Webb, as he actually is, was struggling because in London there were lots of guys with lots of charisma and great haircuts and great jeans, whereas I was just a skinny little thing from the south coast, and um, all these charismatic guys couldn't play like him.
Hmm.
What he wanted was somebody who would play the parts exactly as he wanted them, and even for me, I'd be there, and there were sort of lines in things, and I'd go, "Oh, I could do this," and he'd go, "No, no, just play what I played." So my biggest, most visible job involved playing the chords G, F, and C. Yeah. But I guess that sort of gives, if you were going to take an underlying principle that we may talk about later about performance, early learning about play what's required, do the job at hand, be
Hmm.
fit for purpose. Yeah, there's there's a lot of stuff about virtuosos, people who see me play, who don't often see good players go, "Oh, you're really good." I never say it, but in my head I go, "No, I'm competent. I can do the job that's required." Put something in front of me, so that will come back. So I then did a professional music career in London from the age of 18. Actually, I started in '78. and found it not challenging enough for my brain. And then at age 21, I went and trained as a specialist learning disability nurse. And I had this lovely career for the next sort of 12 years of, I trained as a nurse, then I did a year running a teaching school that we invented in the days before these existed. This was 85. Then I do a bit more time as a nurse. Then I went and worked on the holiday camps. I did 2 years as a band leader on the holiday camps, playing. Then I at the end of the holiday camps, I was sort of settled back down. Yeah, God, look, I am forgetting. You'll have to forgive me, Bill. In the mid-80s, after I trained, one of the things I spent a lot of time doing was that I was a part of a writing partnership. So actually with songwriting from about 86 through to about 2000, I worked with a guy called Keith James, and we had lots of contracts that meant we would be asked to write 10 songs for a BBC radio session, or the 10 songs royalty free for an American company, which was quite hilarious because it meant writing to commission. So the most entertaining was one that was the guy from Bucks Fizz, and his management wanted to put him forward for Eurovision. And so we got commissioned to write a Eurovision song, which involved Keith and me going to WH Smith's that still sold records and going, and finding, now that's what I call Eurovision. And literally listening to 20 or 30 Eurovision songs, breaking it down and going, so what's a Eurovision song consist of? Yeah. So that was it. At that time also, main income, so that was lovely as a way of making a living. And then we'd sort of finish at about 5 o'clock of an evening and go and do gigs down the M4 corridor, which was full of wine bars and all sorts of things. So then involved, and we would be recording. So in the end, we were able to set up our own recording studio to do the projects in. Settled down, brought up my family, always gigged. So, and was a specialist nurse, was senior nurse manager, was with learning disabilities. And I think what's relevant is, I think that early experience of training from 81 and then always working in it as well as the music career, one or the other, meant a kind of love of learning. That's where it started. I didn't realise it was so central to me. And brought my family up, and then, again, maybe need to cut it out, I whistle blew. I uncovered abuse. I was a senior nurse. Service director and consultant were off, and I got called into one of the houses where they said, we need somebody to see this. So I blew the whistle. Service director, consultant, charge nurses, and the staff team all lost their jobs. They were locking people up illegal, giving sedatives illegally. But of course, as we know, the chief executive and the executive directors all covered their back, and I became person non grata, which was the point that I fell on my feet about 18 months into that and started working at Northbrook. Throughout all that story, so I guess the picture, if I was going to do a summary, it's always been about learning, it's always about supporting people, and the music career has always been a constant within that. So I probably have, 50% of my life has been about performing and 15% being about supporting people learning. So
absolutely. And Northborough is obviously where I was privileged enough to get to know you, and that's obviously where I was taught by you, and it was such a transformative experience for me, and I cannot thank you enough for that. So if you don't mind, we'll delve straight into performance now, because this particular discussion is primarily targeted at students, and one of the things in GCSE and in BTEC is they need to do performance. solo and ensemble.
Right.
And I'd like to focus first on solo because that's such a massive thing. I mean, if you take into consideration in secondary school, kids who are like, usually teachers try to get it done first thing because it's the most engaging project. But if you think about it, in year 10, they're only like 15. A lot of them have never done anything like this before. And keeping in mind that it has to be in front of an audience as well. The nerves and everything else to go with it. So let's start with the process. What advice could you give students to help them prepare for such a potentially transformative moment?
Okay. I think one of the things that often happens to us is we all think that we're the most important thing in everybody's lives around us. There are a few kind of these memes out there which say, you know, you think everybody's looking at you, they aren't. So they're great ideas. However, when you get told you're going to do a solo performance in front of people, they really are looking at you. But I think one of the important concepts that students can be helped to learn is that people want you to get it right. People are there on your sides. People don't want to catch you out. Even when you're being judged as part of an assessment, of whatever level I assessed at, we were always looking for what people were getting right. Yeah. And boy, you had to have done no preparation to have any of us say, I'm sorry, you have nothing here to present us. We have nothing that we can mark. So I think to prepare students for it, helping them with some of those thinking skills about, you know, what is this actually that's happening? I think, so that would be one thing I would look at. And I would do that. I would be looking at what are the experiences that we can be helping students think about with it. So, for example, you know, breaking it down to what are the things that you do in front of an audience? Yeah, what are the things you do where people are watching you? What are your other stuff that you've done through life? Getting them to reflect on where they're already doing it. But also looking at those situations within classes about catching the students doing those sort of things. So reflecting on an experience, something I did a lot of stuff with students coming from school, is that typical group of 16-year-olds coming in were used to the idea that when I asked a question, they had to get the answer right. And I used to do stuff within the early months, you know, right from the very first week, saying, sorry, forgive me, Bill, I don't know how to mute other things. So I would be doing stuff, you know, the first thing I would be actually asking students is, why do you think I ask questions? Yeah, and getting them. And of course, the answer were always, you know, included some funny ones like to catch me out, to catch me out and to see if I've been concentrating, etc. and etc. And my way of framing it was simply, no, it's to see if I'm managing to get the message across, see if where you are at the moment, what you already know. And so actually, I don't care if you get it right or wrong. I just care if you give an answer.
Yeah. I remember specifically sometimes you throw an answer out there and give us, it seemed like ages to think about it and try to think of an answer. And I do remember actually after a little while trying to think, right, okay, Trevor doesn't mean that. What does he mean? And so many cogs having to turn. And sometimes it would be the first thing when we all arrive. But yeah, it was very important. I know that from my teaching experience. Very, very important.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical, and it doesn't speak well to kids' experiences at their secondary school.
Mm.
That anxiety about answering a question, about being on the spot. I'm mindful, having colleagues that have taught at secondary school, the number of class size, the kind of pressure in terms of on performance, in terms of your students have to get through.
In the grading criteria for GCSE and BTEC performance units, for solo and ensemble, they're graded roughly the same. And the sort of broadest possible summarization of the grading criteria is, for like a basic pass, they need to do something which is fit for purpose. Let's start with that. Let's break it down. Let's start with that. What would you expect to see, in your professional opinion, as a musician and as an educator? What would you expect to see in a performance that is fit for purpose, and just that's it?
Okay, fit for purpose, in my take on that, is about those concepts. It's going back to the simplest definition of music that we used to use when you and I were doing stuff, which was it's rhythm, it's harmony, it's melody. And we can break it down to that fit for purpose can be as simple as playing an incredibly straightforward piece, well within your ability, that is in time, has a clear melody within it, and has a some harmonic material in there. Now, obviously, for the range of instruments, some instruments like flute, you don't play chords, but even within there, having a melody that quite clearly is moving through different chord changes, it becomes something your ears can take on there. So the very idea of something being fit for purpose is actually
In
breaking
a
it down to
performance.
what is the simplest thing you can do within the performance that's got some of those elements within it. I think there is a tendency to always want to be thinking, I've got to do something really good and really challenging. Yeah, that's for later on. But if we're starting with that idea of fit for purpose, it's going to be as simple as possible. A joke I have ever often made when I was teaching performance was, if I had £1 for every blazing guitar solo that I've played professionally, I'd have £1. My professional career has been all about making singers sound good.
Yeah.
It's generally why I get employed. It means I play some of the simplest stuff that's there on guitar. All the solo stuff that I do, all the lead guitar, is for my entertainment and to fill in a very tiny part. Yeah. Generally, I'm playing the chords G, C, or D. So think of the simplest thing that there is to do on your instrument, stuff you get within the first 6 months. That's where my money came from. But it's fit for purpose, but not only that, you start layering other bits on top of it. So complexity often doesn't play a part in it until you start getting to the next levels.
Absolutely. And in my experience, I remember seeing during a training session for music tech, I know it's not performance, but it's still the same principle. Yeah. I had a student who chose to do Don't Stop Me Now, and had to record all the different parts and try and give it the right production value, similar to Queen themselves. And it's like, teachers were advised to offer or make students think about potentially doing songs which are just an acoustic guitar, 2 vocals.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's fit for purpose. So bringing that back to performance, same as you said, is it in time? Is it in time? Even if it's a straightforward, simple song. Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes on bass. Is it in time? Are you playing the right notes? Are you playing technically okay? Like, is there minimal fret buzz and stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
So, fit for purpose.
It's fit for purpose, and that's a good entry level. And it's interesting that that's a concept. For example, in my nursing career, where I did also a lot of staff and nursing development, I lectured in Oxford for that on the early nursing degrees, and fit for purpose was the important concept. When somebody qualifies as a nurse, they're fit for purpose, and it's a low bar. You know, newly qualified nurses know very little, but they're going to be basically safe.
Yeah.
The rest of it then comes on there. So with a solo performance, yeah, getting really clear. So one of my big bugbears is the importance of mentorship. And Bill, you and I were having a conversation, which I curtailed everything because I feel so strongly about it. So for students, in terms of your performance, that bit of preparation, using your teacher to get really clear, I was going to do this for my performance. And really listening, but then asking them again. So if this isn't right, what about this?
Yeah.
What about this? I think there's an inherent politeness that we often get in English culture about, oh, I don't want to bother you. Well, that's what lecturers are there for. So if you're going to start out with going, oh, what am I going to do? Yeah, getting that first bit about going, yeah, this is the right thing to do. This is simple inside my ability, and it's going to demonstrate these important elements. Yeah,
Absolutely.
So bother your teachers. Get clear what that starting level is of getting it, and once you understand that, next levels, the grading criteria are going to go up from there.
Yes. Now, rather than faffing about with all the individual grading criteria in between, right up at the top, there's one word which keeps popping up, which is so fluffy, and it's quite annoying, but it'd be really, really good to get your take on it. For really, really good grade, you have to give a performance with flair. That word, flair. What does flair mean to you, Trevor?
Okay. It's again, it's a nice fluffy one, isn't it? And I'm sure my experience of some teachers is I'm sure it gets interpreted in all sorts of ways. So to go back to my previous thing, as students, your teacher is there to get you the best grade they can. So ask them what that means. And if you don't understand what their answer means, say, I still don't get it. What would you be looking for? However, for me, when you're looking at flair, it may be a really simple flute melody. But I would then, to start thinking about flair, I would be looking at how do I start it? How do I finish it? That some time has gone into, instead of going, I start here and I go through it and it's all the same, I go, so where does this start? Where does it finish? And how do people know that I'm finishing it? And to put some stuff under that, you might consider that in terms of this melody, even within an 8-bar melody, you can start thinking about tempo. What speed am I going to play it? It has to have a pulse, but sometimes we might go, if you're just a flute player on your own, you might just go, you know, do, 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 do. Yep.
Yeah.
You're going to pull it around just a little bit.
Give it a little bit of rubato.
Yeah. So you can play with the time. There's always the dynamic. I love the word monotonous because it means one tone. I play at the same volume all the way through. It's going to be monotonous. We're now starting to get into some ideas where you can start going, oh, flair is this sort of, I don't know, he's got flair. Well, he probably is starting and he's using time and he's using dynamic. He might be using time, tempo, dynamic, tone. If you have an instrument on which you can play harder, softer on a guitar, where I strike the strings if I'm doing a solo guitar, close to the bridge, metallic, yeah, down here. I might look at it. And playing with those sorts of elements, dynamics, tempo, tone, all that. And they become quite concrete, that you can actually start recording yourself and going, am I playing monotonous? Is there a pulse in there? Yeah. So that's what I would be looking at.
That makes sense, especially at a further education level.
Yeah.
Where you start to really explore these ideas and analyze them and really break them down, which is fantastic. Now, from my experience in secondary school, and I'd like to get your opinion on this. Oh, sorry. It seems like you weren't quite finished.
No, absolutely.
Cool.
Silence was a...
In secondary school, I often told my students who got the tempo right, were always in time, played all the right chords, notes. A lot of the time it was pianists also singing. And they'd be like, right, how can I make sure I get the highest level possible, the highest grade possible? And then I'd say, right, now you need to find out what the song is about. And in the simplest terms, express the meaning of the song through your playing and your feeling. Like, you should be able to see it in your face whilst you're playing as well.
Yeah. I think that because we're talking about performance and I'm, my work being largely supporting people, one of the things I'm always keen on getting people thinking about are what get called the soft skills. It's how you think about it. One of the best examples that I had used when I was learning classical guitar was that I was doing a waltz, and it was quite challenging. I was about 19. It gives you an insight into my life. I was a professional musician having guitar lessons as my hobby. It makes me laugh how much of my life was guitar. And what the teacher did was say, okay, let's try this. Have you ever seen on the telly or have you ever seen people waltzing? Can you get that picture? What are the images that you get in your head when you start seeing a waltz? Now, I come from a family where my dad was playing Chopin, so I'd heard lots of Chopin, played quite competently, but also at that time these costume dramas and things like that. So he was saying, so what I want you to do now is to imagine all of that. Yeah, picture it. Are you able to picture it? Try that out. Now play the piece. Yeah. And lo and behold, he went exactly, because I was imagining these big skirts going with that. Important things with soft skills that worked with me. You have to remember for yourself, if you're not somebody that does that goes, oh, I can see that, have another way of thinking of it. A waltz might flow. You might want to sort of listen to the sound of the sea and sort of going, oh, waltzes, what does that mean to me? If you don't know what a waltz is, there's another one, which is go listen to some. Yeah. Underestimated thing. When you're doing GCSE music, listening actively, so putting stuff on and just going, oh, if I'm doing a waltz, let's listen to some. But also have it on in the background passively. Let it just have stuff playing, as you're walking to school, when you're doing things. Find some bits that speak to you that you like. And there is a kind of odd osmosis that goes on. I would, however, say that that's relatively advanced, and I think it reflects, doesn't I, that my teaching experience is FE and HE. But if I was going back to that level, if I was using my experience from other areas of teaching, it's remembering that for some people, if they're quite concrete and things, they're going to find those a bit flair, a bit airy-fairy. So again, bring it back to some concrete things. Yeah. And sort of going, so what's happening here? Let's talk about the volume that this person's playing at. Find good models of performances, play them to the students, going, we're going to look at flair. So for students yourself, I'm going into teacher mode again, aren't I? But as a student, one of the things I do is I listen to a huge amount of music. because I'm still learning stuff all the time. You know, it's one of the great things about being a musician. I find something that I can't do and go, oh, good. But I listen to it a lot without my instrument in my hand, so I get to hear all those sort of things. So for a student, but actually also then breaking it down and going, what's he doing with the volume? Does he always play in time? What happens at the start? What happens at the end? And then with your instrument in your hand, start trying those things.
Do you think it's more beneficial to be listening to live albums for rehearsing for a live performance compared to more studio stuff? Obviously talking in more rock and pop terms, but...
In rock and pop terms, no. I think it's important to listen to as wide a collection as you can. So, and also, you know, GCSE students not able to go to a pub, but there's usually concerts going on in school halls, local churches.
And YouTube is full of them.
Listen to anything. Okay, that's the other thing I would say to any student doing music. I think my advantage was that I had a dad who was learning piano. So at an early age, I heard Chopin, I heard the Switched On Bach album by Wendy Collis, so I was exposed to some Bach. I was exposed to Sarti. I was exposed to brass band music. You know, this was all the stuff that was going on. Merengue fairground organs. If you want to hear a monotonous sound, listen to any fairground organs. They start loud and they carry on loud and they never get quiet and there's no emotion in it. But have a listen, because it'll give you an idea of going, you know. So that idea of exposing yourself to as much listening as possible. And oddly, those things do come into your playing. It sounds like, yeah, but I want, you know, I'm going to be assessed on this. I want to have control over this. Okay, the control brings us back to those concretes of the volume I play at, dynamics. You know, if your students are looking, I don't know if at that age you'll have got into expression, but I'm sure grade 5 theory also includes some expression marks, things like that. That's a really nice concrete one for anybody doing a more classically based instrument. Start going, yeah, expression. Listen to that one that all your students in your class would play on guitar. Nothing else matters. Guitar, nice and quiet. Yeah. How does pop music do it? Yeah. So I think you've got to, for at that age, you're talking 15 to 16. Is it 14 to 16? Yeah. Again, talking to the students, listen to lots of stuff, but look to also get some really concrete ideas. That thing about I can play quieter, I can play louder, I can slow down a little at the end, I can start slower. Yep.
Yeah.
So those kind of things are what's going to help you move towards flair. Flair is really, have I got some control on my instrument of the little details that take it beyond, I played in time, I played the right notes.
It's where I guess a common term would be to be able to make it your own.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. But if I start thinking about how I want to do this, I'm still going to play with those ideas.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a solo, you know, common in my job, you know, where I'm playing, for example, in a Rolling Stones tribute band is one of the current bands. That requires me to play certain parts exactly as they come and look for the tone. But just twice in 2 45-minute sets, there's a guitar solo. Now, I can't go way outside of the Rolling Stones, but I can go, something that makes it me is. And I will be looking at all those little things. So it will be about how am I going to come in? You know, what's the first bit that I'm going to play that's going to make people's ears prick up? What about my vibrato? You know, I'm going to give it some real wang, or I'm just little bits that will take it on and become making my own. It's nice. I often see teachers of creativity enjoy going off into these long things about flair and make it your own without bringing it back to stuff that works at the level. So You know, as a little aside here for teachers, the importance of listening to your students. It's the one bit of advice that you'll have had from me. You know, did you do your PGCE?
Yeah.
One thing I used to say to all the PGCE students, because they'd be so caught up in the technique of things, and I'd be going, yeah, look at what's going on outside. Look at what the students are doing. Don't think about you, think about them.
Absolutely. One of the most common mistakes for PGCE students is to talk too much. And not just PGCE students, teachers in general. And that is one of the main interview killers that I've seen and experienced sometimes as well. Absolutely.
So, move it back to concrete. For you as a student, what are the things that I can have control over? I don't know what flair means. Well, let's pull some things out. And a good student will start kind of taking those ideas themselves. Student that's struggling a little bit more, if you're somebody going, oh, I don't get this, well, revisit it. Yeah, have a think about it. Do that listening thing. Do that asking questions. Look at the other students. Look at the guy that you're looking at and go, oh, God, why does he sound so good? Don't do it in that envy thing, which I always used to, oh, God, he's better than me.
Yeah.
Eventually, oh, why? Oh, it's that he does.
Yeah.
That one thing that he's doing. Yeah, he's got a little trick that, so as a student, that looking, listening, seeing what's going on.
That's why, in my opinion, milestone performances before the main event are really, really important. Not only to get over the shyness and everything else, the performance jitters, but also so that other students who may be doing the same instrument or something can see how other people play, see what they're doing right, offer constructive criticism, and see what they're doing really well, and take it into their own performance as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. I'll agree with you 100% on that. Listen, absolutely. I mean, I must confess, I much too often, I think, get caught up in the exciting and emotional aspects when a student does a really fantastic performance. Like in the last school, before I finished my teaching career, there was this female student who performed Johnny Cash. I can't believe I've blanked the name of the song now. The 9 Inch Nails cover.
Bill, it was one of your performances.
I know. Hurt, of course. It was one of my performances at college, and I got so emotional because I could tell that she was giving it so much emotion as well. And I must confess, I do get caught up in those moments when I see that a student really understands something and actually puts the emotion and time and effort into it and actually reacts to your feedback. It feels like when everything comes together, it just makes me become overwhelmed with sort of pride.
And then you go, wah! And, you know, this now I'm going to move away from personal things. I think something that's lacking in teachers and in teachers training is an understanding of what maturity of students actually means. You were saying earlier about as teachers that we can start talking about concepts, what flair means, but actually that ability to reflect, you mentioned earlier about your own personal things, you know.
Yes.
If somebody asked me, I used to do lots of experiential learning as a nurse, and until the age of 30, I'd get put through an experience, you know, and the facilitator would say, so how do you feel? And I'd be, I fucking no idea. Not a clue. Don't know. Because I didn't actually have the emotional language and the emotional maturity to be able to contact that bit. So about, you know, age 31, 32, I started developing that. Now that's damn late to start, you know, kind of developing that. So I think often we don't pay enough attention to how you develop those sort of, that kind of things in students, and remembering that, you know, that whole thing, and I'm using very outmoded terms, but things are quite concrete, you know. Think of all the tribalism that goes on in 14 to 16 year olds about, you know, Beyonce is rubbish. I only like heavy metal. You know, those sort of things.
Yeah, all
You
too
know,
well.
that are coming back. Yeah. Anyway, Bill, back to you.
No worries. Tell you what, I saw fantastic stuff. I would like, Trevor, please, to pounce a question upon yourself.
Yeah.
There's a significant difference, isn't there, between performing solo and as an
Yeah.
ensemble. Now,
Yeah.
ensemble just means with at least one other person.
Yeah.
But still, that's one more person than just yourself. But if it's you getting the grade and you're having to rely on someone else, which I remember from my Northbrook days and my further education days was a massive issue. Hence why
Yeah.
we often went and did our own things, even when it was advised that we work with others. But in secondary schools, what advice can you bestow upon students who may be struggling with thinking of, let's start with the repertoire. What sort of songs to pick for an ensemble performance? Should it be songs that just you are passionate about, or should you take the other people you are planning on working with into consideration?
I suspect that there is something in the grading criteria, if we looked at what the top grading criteria is, that brings us. So first off, Bill, forgive me, teacherly answer first. To answer that question, I need to know what's the distinguishing word within the grading criteria that relate to that.
In terms of performing with others.
Performing with others. There'll be a word in there which is about looking for collaboration or something like that. Yeah? What's the word?
In ensemble performances, a consistently responsive reaction and, where appropriate, adjustment to other parts is evident.
Right. Yeah.
That is for technical control and expression and interpretation. There are 3 different criteria. That's for the third one.
Okay, I can do a student-based answer for that.
Go for it.
So, when you're having to think about what you do as an ensemble, it's that real challenge of working within a group. And groups at their best mean that everybody wins. Yeah? It means that groups actually put stuff in the middle and they go, I want to do this. And I want to do this. And people, so everybody's coming along with ideas. And the skill within there about choosing what it is that you're going to do is you may have to let go of what's your favorite, which is going to mean that everybody within that group wins. Yeah. It might mean having to compromise on doing a piece that you're passionate about because it's beyond the abilities of somebody else within the group. So for the ensemble stuff, expect to spend much more time on the planning and the discussion about what you might be doing. Be prepared to try things, find they don't work, but have at the end of it that actually this idea that everybody in the group wins. Yeah?
Yeah.
Be aware also that group work consists of different people bringing different things to the table. And this is where it's a reasonable expectation that your teacher is going to be looking at what's going on within the group and picking out those people who, for some reason, are on the edge. Might be about their confidence, might be about them not being certain. It's all sorts of things. And you can reasonably expect your teacher to be keeping an eye and being responsive to you if you're going, we're struggling with this. Yeah, we're not getting there. So you have to compromise, but you compromise so that everybody wins. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's looking for, this one works for me. Oh, well, I don't think I can do that. And being everybody in the group being prepared to accept giving some way. So that deals with the early bit. Really put time into that early planning, that early what is going to show us all at our best. What's the kind of thing that will work with it? I think also then within terms of how you do a good ensemble performance, one of the key bits is something that I will always go on. I'll go on to teachers if I'm training them. I will go on to students. I'll go on to band members. It's the importance of listening. Yeah. And listening when you're on stage might involve looking at what somebody else is doing, actually hearing what they're doing, being responsive to the kind of nuances that you might see about the way they're standing. Yeah. That somebody's sort of kind of drifting out, somebody's losing their way. How do you help that? Yeah. But you're just actually listening within there. So, for example, really tough thing for guitarists to do, don't play. Yeah. Let the ensemble do it. It's an exercise we used to do all the time with ensemble performances was get students to play their own part, beginning to end. Then, for example, in a band, put the bass and the drums together and right, let's listen to your part. And everybody would listen actively and do it. And then we'd go, okay, guitarist, play your part. And I would always with singers would go, oh yeah, but I can't do it without the band. You're going to need to start practicing at home, find your note, put a metronome on, sing. Yeah. Because that ability to take it apart, put it back together again is really important. So remember, when you're doing the ensemble, don't always get in there, bash from beginning to end. Sometimes break it down. Sometimes go, oh, how's your part? Or are these two parts me? Is somebody playing a bummer? If it sounds rough, you go, oh, something going on there. Okay. So as students, in summary, spend lots of time planning, much more time than you think you're going to need to. Then spend a lot of time as you're developing the performance piece, listening to what others are doing. Those two skills are going to mean when you're performing it on stage, you're going to be there picking it up. Yeah?
Absolutely. I think that's golden advice, because there are a couple of things that you talked about there that I'd forgotten about during my teaching experience, and actually reflecting on it, I can think of a couple of situations where that would have been really, really useful. And the one especially about planning that I would advise students is know the deadline, because sometimes teachers will be like, right, we're going to work on an ensemble, but if students don't know the deadline for it, then they don't know how far in advance they need to plan. Yeah. It would be really, really good to have that timeline. And I remember at the beginning of each assignment back in Northbrook days when I was under your tutelage, we would have a timeline, and sometimes we'd have the timeline staying on the whiteboard throughout the whole project, and we'd be ticking off the sessions, and it's like, no way, I cannot believe it's going that quickly. Like always at the beginning, it'd be like, oh, that's quite slow, and then down at the very end, it's like, oh my god, I can't believe we only have 2 sessions left, and we need to do this. So absolutely, I completely agree. You need to plan. If the teacher hasn't already told you when the deadline is for the actual performance, find out, so that you can plan. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's a, there is a reality. What's in time planning terms, I get called a last minuter. Yeah. That's a consequence of dyslexia. I suspect I'd have probably got a diagnosis of ADHD if I was at school nowadays. I am by nature chaotic, and one of the things that I learned was, okay, I'm a last minuter, so what do I have to do up front that means that I'm going to cope with last minuting? Yeah. So I even used to, in the end, plan my own bad habits. I'd go, yeah, but I know that I'm going to doing my write-up is the last thing I'll do, right? In which case, let's have a document with loads of links in it, any words, any bullet points that have come to it, so that I don't have to go, oh god, I've done nothing. So back to the students, that thing of knowing when you've got to do it, and within there, that's all I have to. Forrest Gump moment.
No, that's absolutely fine, Trevor. that's more than enough information for this particular segment. And
I was just about to say, I've done the thing that I always do. It's so interesting, Bill, and it's such a nice thing to revisit these areas of skills, because since the pandemic, I just haven't been using these. All my teaching disappeared, all the performance disappeared. Of course, I had a year, I went back to a grown-up job, and then I got COVID in November, and I've been ill since then. And I've actually started on Twitter. I found some people who are supporting the early teachers, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. Found a really good book on mentorship, which is one of my passions.
Fantastic.
So I do occasionally, from my very distant experience, comment when you're getting early years teachers, the early careers teachers thing, which is new, and they're going, oh, what advice? And I do two things. I say, I'm sorry, this is all I ever contribute. Find a good mentor, and if the mentor you're given is crap, find a new one, and listen to your students.